All right, four last groups of people, and I think I'm really running close to time, and I need to wrap this up. Childhood traumatic brain injury. I think the key focus here is that we've talked about the fact that for executive functions to fully develop, you need 2.5 decades. The age of the injury for this child is critical. You'll want to dig around a little bit in the kid's history if you've got a child on your caseload with TBI and find out what age did this accident occur. A lot of those kids might look pretty good and recover fairly well until their same age peers have moved on to the next level of expected development. And then this child doesn't make that transition. Those executive functions, their frontal lobe injury, in effect, can hold them static in a developmental phase that's immature and insufficient for the demands that their academics or their social groups will expect of them. So with this population, it's typical and very useful and very appropriate to do some reassessment periodically as development would hope that they're moving through more subtle's not the word, more sophisticated acquisition of executive functions. What's this child doing? And you might need to intermittently provide therapy in order to increase their awareness, teach them new language-based compensatory strategies, teach them how and when to apply those strategies, and then work to generalize those skills. Because of the nature of TBI and depending on the site of lesion, you might see a little bit of everything. If it's a global diffuse brain injury, you will see a lot of all areas of executive function affected. If it's a very specific site of lesion, a very focal traumatic injury, you might just see pieces of these, whether it's a ventromedial frontal lobe problem or a dorsolateral or orbitofrontal, all those different anatomical sites that might be affected. So you kind of need to do a global assessment and look at those 3 areas of cognitive processing. Look at all 6 of these areas of executive function components. Look at what's normally expected for the age the child is, and then look and see, well, how old was this child when the injury occurred, and is that kind of what I'm seeing now? And how can we help move along to the best of this child's ability, these skills? Researchers have been looking at SLI, not a lot, but more so in recent years, and executive function deficits, and some of the findings are on this slide. Deficits in working memory and attention, difficulty planning, and the planning is also linked with an impaired ability to generate relevant and effective strategies. Often there's difficulty with the ability to inhibit or suppress irrelevant information from coming into the picture. They have difficulty sorting and being relevant when they're trying to develop themes and concepts. And you'll see this borne out in how they try to organize more complex sentence structure. And as language demands move on to a narrative level, deficits in higher level thought and more complex discourse level output. They also have they perform less well on tests of flexibility, adapting, generating alternative strategies. These kids with SLI and executive function deficits are also appearing to overall have less well-developed impulse control, less well-developed self-regulation skills. These things kind of all culminate in the kid with SLI developing those social, play, pragmatic interactions that are not as efficient and not as effective. And so is it a language problem? Is it a language problem and an executive function problem? what can we do with language to support this? It's kind of an interesting area to look at. But clearly, the performance on tests of executive function are indicating in this population of kids that there's a whole host of executive function components that is not developing as we would expect to see. And then I just chose a couple here at the end, fetal alcohol syndrome and Williams syndrome. And you know, I could read down through the slide for you just as well as you can yourselves. I guess the overall comment is just to look at the list, look at the variety of executive functions that are not normal in kids with fetal alcohol syndrome. You know, and be thinking to yourself, well, what can I do with my language-based therapy? What can I be doing with the way that I write goals and provide cues and teach strategies and teach self-awareness and self-regulation? What can I do to infuse this knowledge into therapy that you might be doing with these kids? And to start kind of thinking about the idea that our language therapy has such a far more broad-reaching capacity to influence so many other skills and so many other potential successes in the kids that we treat. The same, let's see, Williams syndrome. Again, the same, I think. These kids are, for Williams syndrome, I think particularly, these kids are such socially gregarious and outgoing, and sometimes the degree of their language can really mislead you into thinking that their actual reasoning and self-regulation and deliberate planning is perhaps better than it really is. Kids with Williams syndrome, the research in looking at their executive functions is finding really poor planning and sequencing and organization, trouble linking cause and effect and predicting consequences and outcomes, poor control over impulses and responses, and not being very flexible or adaptive. And these are kids who are going to look pretty normal and sound really socially engaged, and yet as they grow into adults, how savvy are they going to be in their thinking and their decision making? Maybe that's as good a point as any to kind of pull everything together. And you know, I guess my thinking is that the more that we can extend our therapy sessions, maximize the skills and the knowledge and the expertise that we have in this field, it can have far-reaching impacts on so many other elements of these kids' lives. We think about these things, we are aware of these things, certainly we see these deficits in the kids that we treat. But now there's a body of research out there that we can access. There's a name for this cluster of reasoning and problem solving and thinking skills. There's a body of growing evidence that can give us something to sink our teeth into for what's the normal developmental span. And in terms of therapy, a lot of this originally kind of generated from TBI literature. And now we're starting to have more research that is taking those theories and concepts and applying them to the child in a developmentally appropriate context. You know, how can we get right at where they are in terms of their capacity, their level of development, and lead them along and expand their potential to develop and promote the acquisition of these executive function skills. And really how fascinating it is that language can do such interesting, fascinating, life-altering things for us. So I suppose that's sort of my fascination with this area and this topic in general, and kind of what led me into doing a lot more of research and looking into and reading about executive functions in the child, either developing normally or with some sort of language based disorder. And so if you've got questions or comments or thoughts, I welcome them, and I hope you've found this a useful, interesting presentation, and thanks very much.